Fresh Take is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subject matter. You've been warned. Enjoy the show. Yeah. What it is! What it do? Welcome to Fresh Take and the Shorthanded podcast. We have sound. We have Scott Robbins' beautiful, beautiful face.
Hello.
And we're ready to talk about some NHL finals.
Yeah, it's a great time of year, Josh. It really is the pinnacle of hockey. And when you get to the Stanley Cup Finals, you know that these are two teams that deserve to be in this location. You don't get those pretenders that kind of slip in, and you don't get very many of those Cinderella stories left. So we have two very, very solid teams in Chicago and Tampa Bay, and it's going to be one heck of a series.
Two of the top players overall in the NHL with Taves and Patty Kane, and for the Blackhawks against Steven Stamkos. Jonathan Taves, can we say officially now he's the best player in hockey?
He's up there. Like, he's got to be at least one of the best hockey players in the entire world, mainly because I think he is the best two-way player in the game.
Yeah.
He is so clutch on the ice when he's in scoring situations, and he always comes up big in those big-time situations for Chicago. But when you take a look at his defensive game and the things that he does to back check and ends up, creating those offensive opportunities by playing so well defensively, doesn't get beat very often on the ice. You don't see him see too many guys wheel around him and then go past him for a chance on net. He is one of the best two-way players in the game, and there's a reason why he's been the captain of Chicago for so long.
In that Ducks series, he just impressed me so much in that Game 7 because, we talked all season that Anaheim was just a bigger team and they're just stacked on the defensive side, and he just kind of just went and got it.
And that's the type of player he is. Chicago's so deep of a team, especially at forward, that they can get scoring from, I'd say, three lines consistently. And Kate or Taves didn't really have to be that guy in the first couple of series, but that Anaheim series, he was able to put the puck in the back of the net with ease, especially in the last couple of games there when they really had Anaheim on the ropes. And Taves was really was the Jonathan Taves show in that series. And I think the biggest thing heading into the series is this is a guy who's won 2 Stanley Cups already.
Yeah.
This is a guy who has the experience. He knows what it takes to be at the biggest stage in hockey. And it's going to be a very interesting series to see what Jonathan Taves does because unlike Tampa Bay, who are all very green and don't really know how to get to this level before, it's all first time for them. Jonathan Taves, been there, done that, and he is an absolute star for Chicago.
We're going to talk about the finals, but I really want to go back and talk about the whole playoffs first. First of all, I wanted to go back and listen to the preseason podcast to check out how your bracket did, but I hadn't had an opportunity to get there. So remind me, how did your bracket do?
My bracket did very, very well. I got to say, I picked the Final Four correctly. So I got all 4 matchups, and I picked Chicago-Tampa Bay final. So I had in my original bracket Tampa Bay beating Chicago in the finals. A lot of people are picking Chicago in the series. I guess I'm going to stick with my pick with Tampa Bay. It's going to be a very close series. I think this one's going to go 6 or 7 games just because these two teams are very evenly matched. I had a little bit of luck on my side for my bracket for sure.
I was so close on my Final Four. I had 2 out of the 4 right. I should have had 3, but I went with my heart and picked the Calgary Flames to beat the Anaheim Ducks. When I knew the Ducks should have gone, but I picked with my heart on that one. But I had Chicago, Montreal, and the Lightning, as we know, steamrolled through Montreal and got to there. Do you think the Rangers are the biggest disappointments in this playoffs?
It's tough to say. I would say neither of those teams are the biggest disappointment. I would say St. Louis was the biggest disappointment going out in the first round. But you know what? The Rangers, they've been close. They've been so close the last couple of years. Last year, losing in the Cup Finals. This year, losing in the Conference Finals. And the problem is New York just ran into a very, very tough team in Tampa Bay. Yeah. Tampa Bay was able to solve a lot of what New York had to throw at them. And I think the biggest thing was Tampa Bay found a way to score on Henrik Lundqvist. Which was the biggest thing, because there was a couple games in the series where Lundqvist looked shaky, and he was not good. He wasn't the Henrik Lundqvist we all know. So it was, I would say it wasn't a disappointing season for the Rangers. Obviously, this was a team that was contending to win the Stanley Cup, and they didn't even get to the Cup Finals. Yeah. But I still think it was an all right season for the Rangers. I wouldn't push the panic button and blow everything up with that organization.
Maybe a little bit more scoring?
A little bit more scoring, especially with guys like Rick Nash. He had a couple games where he was good, but he wasn't nearly as good as he was in the regular season. Guys like Nash, St. Louis, some of the more experienced guys who have, I guess Nash really hasn't had a whole lot of playoff experience, but St. Louis definitely has. And it's those type of guys that need to step up. Good things for the Rangers, though. Derek Stepan was fantastic this playoffs. Derek Brassard. You get a guy like Chris Kreider. So they got some of those guys, some of the younger guys that really have started to make their mark, and this isn't just a veteran team that's trying to squeak out what left they have of their veteran players.
What was your favorite story of the playoffs?
Favorite story in the playoffs, I got to say, is just how competitive it's been.
Yeah.
And it's been quality matchups. It hasn't been too many blowouts. Calgary-Anaheim was a blowout because Calgary really didn't have anything left in the tank.
Yeah.
But other than that, the last two series both went 7 games. This one could easily go 7 games.
It really could, yeah.
We're going to be playing pretty late into June, I think, at least into the mid part of June in the Stanley Cup Finals. So,
fingers crossed. I mean, I mainly handle the basketball side of things for Fresh Take, and I've been thoroughly impressed, and I think a lot of ESPN analysts and a lot of people have really took notice that these NHL playoffs have really stole the show for postseason action.
And it's, I think, a testament to just how exciting it can be. Especially, I still think that playoff overtime in NHL is the most exciting overtime there is in any sport. And the past couple playoffs, it seems like every single year, man, that was the best playoffs I've ever seen. So the level of competition, and it just keeps going up and up and up. And I think that has to do a lot with the parity in this league.
It does.
And one of the other cool storylines, it was more so in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, but I found it very interesting that the role of the backup goaltender in the NHL now is not so much a backup goaltender. Most goaltenders in the NHL are now 1A and 1B, whereas you take 10 years ago, you'd have your starter and your backup who would never get a shot in the playoffs. But in these playoffs, a lot of teams started riding those tandem goaltenders. Vancouver was doing it. Chicago was doing it for a little while with a few of their goaltenders. Calgary for sure was doing it. And there was a few teams that were really riding those 2 goaltenders. And I think the level of goaltending has just risen so much in the NHL that you can have a backup who at any time can take over from the starter, and that pushes the starter to be even better. So even though this is a league where scoring is the key and the high precedent, and it's the sexy part of the game and it draws all the numbers, the goaltending has been outstanding so far, not only in this playoffs, but for the past couple of years.
I mean, you talk about the goaltending. Ben Bishop has been phenomenal, especially in those conference finals.
Yeah, Ben Bishop has been outstanding, and he's been a goaltender I think has been on the cusp of being among the very, very good or maybe even elite goaltenders in the NHL, but he just hasn't gotten to that point because he hasn't had any playoff experience. Many people thought that because he was playing on such a loaded Tampa Bay team, he was a benefit of the situation that he was brought into, but he is playing extraordinary hockey, and it's definitely tough to get one past a goaltender who's 6'6". That's just the way the game works.
Very true, yeah.
So he's been very, very good for Tampa Bay, and Tampa Bay is definitely going to hold on to him. But I think we brought up on an earlier podcast that Tampa Bay is just loaded with prospect goaltenders. They got a couple in the system right now that have the potential to be starters in the NHL. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do after this season, what they're going to do with some of those players. But right now, ride the hot hand with Bishop.
And like you're saying, this has just been a fantastic. I think the parity has just been really, really the best part about it too, because you had a team like the Calgary Flames that could upset somebody. You had a team like Minnesota that came and beat a really loaded St. Louis Blues team, like you talked about. The St. Louis Blues are one of those teams that we always think, oh, it's kind of like the new Sharks in a way. Like, oh, they're so loaded and they're gonna do so much, and then they do nothing.
That's what's been brought up in the past couple of years, and I was slightly surprised to see Ken Hitchcock got brought back for another year, even though I do think he is one of the better coaches in the NHL to have a team that's underperformed so much in the playoffs over the past couple of years. Last year, they got eliminated by Chicago in the first round, which ended up being, a really tough matchup for them, and I think that's why they got eliminated. But this year, Minnesota, remember, back to midway through the NHL season, Minnesota was not making the playoffs.
No.
They were so far out of it, and then they got Devin Dubnyk, and he ended up having a Vezina caliber nominee campaign. So
I got a thought on Devin Dubnyk for you too, but continue with your statement.
Yeah. So it's St. Louis just needs to figure things out, and I think it starts with the goal out. I don't know how much confidence I have in Brian Elliott. And I've never been a huge fan of Brian Elliott. I always thought he was a good goaltender in the NHL, but never a solid, clear-cut number one. And Jake Allen really hasn't proven a whole lot to me, especially this year. He hasn't been the goaltender I thought that St. Louis thought they were going to have. So I think the number one thing for them has to be get a goaltender that can win them games. And this year it's going to be a little tough. The free agent market's pretty soft for goaltenders, and but the one thing that they might have is they got a ton of depth on D, ton of depth on forward, and we'll see what they do at the draft. They might make some trades. It is a possibility that's on the table.
Yeah, I think you were saying, like, the goaltending, we don't know what's going on. Last year they brought in Ryan Miller to try to shake things up. That didn't really work. Maybe it's time to try to go after someone like a Devin Dubnyk, who is ranked the number one free agent overall on a lot of lists I've seen from Bleacher Report and Sportsnet. Do you agree with that?
I maybe agree with it. I don't think overall, but I think for possibly goaltenders, just because it is such a weak market right now. I'd put maybe Antti Niemi up there as well, but Niemi's really kind of fallen off the last couple of years with the Sharks. Dubnyk had a fantastic season, and not taking anything away from that, but I would not take a risk on Devin Dubnyk right now if I was a GM in the NHL, just because I haven't seen enough. I've seen about half a season of work. So I think that Dubnyk has the potential to be definitely a number one starter. Obviously, he's a Vezina candidate this year. But I think Minnesota is going to hold on to him just because the past few years, they have had just a carousel of goaltenders. When you take a look at Darcy Kemper, Josh Harding, Nicholas Backstrom, Ilya Brizgalov, and the list just goes on and on. So I think they finally found a guy who can lock down the job for now. We'll see how he does next year if Minnesota re-ups with him. But I think Minnesota is going to hold on to him just because he's the first clear-cut number one they've had in a couple of years.
And you would think so, with just getting that big series win against St. Louis and taking those building blocks to become a successful team. They ran into a Chicago club that's obviously Stanley Cup bound now, and we're just kind of steamrolled by them.
And I think that's similar to what happened with Calgary, because Calgary definitely had the team that was able to beat the Vancouver Canucks in the first round, and they were good. But at that point, they were gassed, and they were playing an Anaheim team who were far better than they were. And it wasn't so much that Calgary just played bad or Minnesota played bad. It's just that Chicago and Anaheim were just at a different level than they were, and that's why they were able to advance.
One last question before we get to the finals. Montreal. Again, they fall short of trying to go for that 25th Stanley Cup. What do you think was missing from them?
I think missing from them is maybe a little bit of team chemistry. I think that there's a few lines there that just didn't really click all that much. I think consistent scoring is another big thing. I think their defense wasn't too bad in this previous round. Even today, they re-signed Jeff Petrie to a 6-year deal worth about $5.5 million a year, which I think for a player of that caliber is a great deal for Montreal, and being able to lock him up that long. So you got him, you got Subban. Markov still got a few more years left, and a guy like Nathan Beaulieu or Jared Tenorti who can step in. So I think their defense isn't too bad right now. I think they just need to get more consistent offensive producers. Brendan Gallagher didn't really do a whole lot. Galchenyuk was good for some games, but other games he was silent. And Pacioretty, I know, was battling a lot of injuries, but I think a combination of injuries and just getting more consistent scoring, especially when you're going up teams against, a Tampa Bay Lightning, or if they play New York or something like that, where they've just been rolling at a clip all postseason long.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think the scoring is the main thing. And I think Pacioretty having those injuries definitely hurt a lot too, because kind of seemed to be in a nice little roll, and then coming to the playoffs, those injuries kind of seemed to derail him. And Price seemed a little bit off in the playoffs as well. Not the Hart candidate that we saw in the regular season.
No, and I think that was just a testament to who he had to play every single night, because the difference in regular season to playoffs is when you're playing in the regular season, you might face two really tough teams in a row, and then you'll face some bottom feeders, and you'll be able to rack up wins. And I'm not taking anything away from Price's season. He had one of the best goaltending seasons I've seen since I've been a hockey fan. He was phenomenal this year. But to keep that up during the playoffs when you're facing the same team every single night, and I guess it's kind of a double-edged sword, because as a goaltender, you can learn their tendencies, where they're going to shoot the scores. But from the other side, Tampa Bay was able to figure out a lot where Price's weaknesses were in that series. And I look to the Chicago-Anaheim series quite a bit, when Frederik Andersen, who was a great story this playoffs, he really solidified himself as the number one goaltender in Anaheim. he was really, really weak on his blocker side, and especially kind of on midway part of the net. Chicago found this out, and they exploited it, and they scored time. So I think that Price wasn't bad. He just kind of hit a wall, and he had a peak, and then he had to go down from there. So I think he just hit the peak at the wrong time. Wasn't as good as he could have been in the playoffs, and I wouldn't say that's the full reason Montreal lost, but it definitely contributes.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's move to the NHL finals, and hoping, as hockey fans, that it goes Game 7. Neither one of us have a major horse in this race, so we want to try to get in as much hockey as we can before it goes away to the fall. Let's go with the pluses from both sides, then we'll go to the negatives. Start with Chicago and the plus for them going into this series.
Plus for them, I think the biggest thing is that they've won 2 Stanley Cups in the past 5 years. Yeah. They have that experience. Joel Quenneville is one of the best coaches in the NHL, and he definitely knows how to run that team. They just know how to win. They're a winning organization. Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews may be the best 1-2 punch in the NHL. And then you get the depth scoring in there with Hossa and Sharp and Bickle and Richards and Saad. Brandon Saad, I do have to say, is one of the most underrated players in the NHL, and he has been fantastic for Chicago. So I think that their forward scoring is definitely one of the big pluses for them, along with their top couple D-lines. Seabrook Keith, I think, is the best D-man pairing in the league. They played together for so long. And then you take a look at Oduya and Hjalmarsson, who I think can log a lot of minutes. So Chicago definitely has a lot of pluses going for them that could help them out in this series.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing with Chicago. I look at them, and they're just so deep, right? There's just so many, and there's so many like little household names on their team. A lot of people know these guys. They know Seabrooks, they know Duncan, and obviously Patty Kane and Taves and Corey Crawford. A lot of people know all these names, and I think when you've had that veteran experience too, and you've held up a Stanley Cup, not once but twice, it's really the biggest plus that you can have.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the biggest thing with Chicago is the way they're put together, because you at first glance you look at them and it's like there's a lot of stars on this team. How do they fit in the salary cap? The way they do it is they pick the best possible players for the best possible situations. So their third liners are some of the best third liners in the game. Their fourth liners are grinders, and they know how to play the game really well, but they get them pretty cheap. So that frees up more cap room for guys like Taves and Kane, who are going to be earning a lot more money in the next couple seasons once their new contracts kick in. So this, I think, I've heard from a couple people that they think this is Chicago's last really kick at another Stanley Cup before those contracts come up. And once those contracts come up for Kane and Taves, which are just massive, they might start having to trade away guys like Patrick Sharp or a Brandon Saad. So I think that they're going to be motivated this time around. They are the odds-on favorite, I would say, to win the cup here.
I would agree with you on that. Yeah. By the way, Saad, if you're doing DraftKings, nice little pickup in DraftKings, because he's only like $2 million, $3 million, and Shaw as well. Both of them just easy pickups, and they always get little points here and there, just little DraftKings analysis there for anyone doing DraftKings in the Stanley Cup final. Nice little pickups, $2 million, $3 million pickups, and just great little grinder type of players like you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brandon Saad, there's a reason why he's playing on that top line in Chicago. There's a lot of talent, but he's on the top line with probably Taves and Hossa. Meanwhile, Sharp and Kane are on the second line. So there's a reason Saad's playing on that line. Another reason I think he's one of the most underrated players in the league. And a guy like Shaw, he can play pretty much any aspect of the game you want. If you want him to score goals, he's not a natural goal scorer, but he can get you a couple. But he's a grinder, plays a good two-way game, very smart with the puck, really good heading the puck into the net, as you saw a little bit earlier on.
That should have counted. I know it's against the rules, but come on.
It was against the rules, but it was so awesome. Like, I just wanted it to count so bad because I think I said on Twitter that if NHL 16 doesn't put an ability where you can head it into the net, then I'm not buying it. So. But Chicago's got a lot of good depth guys who have the experience and are kind of the key underlying pieces of why they could win the cup.
And now let's move to the Tampa Bay Lightning. They won a cup 12 years ago, beating the Calgary Flames, trying to go for their second cup ever. There's nobody left from that Stanley Cup roster, coaching, management, anywhere near this team, is there?
There's nobody left from that roster, but there's a couple players, and when I mean a couple, I mean like 2 or 3, who are left from a team that went to the Eastern Conference final a couple of years ago, of course, when the Bruins went to the finals. But I think probably two things that they got going for them. One is, even though they're very inexperienced, that's not necessarily a bad thing because it doesn't get in their heads. It's not one of those things. It's like one of those things where it's ignorance is bliss, right? So they don't know any better, but they are putting up some serious points, and their offensive game has been fantastic. One of the other points I think why they could be as good as they could be in the Cup Finals is, even though Chicago has Joe Quenneville, John Cooper is one of the best young coaches in the entire National Hockey League. He's a very real coach. He doesn't try and sugarcoat stuff to the media or to his players, but he is a real players coach, and he really respects the guys that he sends on the ice. And all the players, go back to the Eastern Conference Final, Ryan Callahan had an emergency appendectomy, and I believe a day and a half later he was back on the ice playing in game 2 or 3. And Cooper said that's a hockey player. That's unbelievable that somebody will want to do that. And that's Callahan basically wanting to not only play in the Eastern Conference Final, but play for his coach. So John Cooper, I think, is one of the rising stars of NHL coaching, and I think he could get up to that level of Joe Quenneville one day. And Tampa Bay, they're young, they're fast, they're exciting, and man, can they score. They got a bunch of players, not only Stamkos, but you take a look at Andre Palat, Nikita Kucherov,
Tyler Johnson.
And I was going to say Tyler Johnson, an undrafted player, never drafted into the NHL, thought he was too small to play the game at 5'9", and he has been, I would say, the best point scorer in the playoffs so far.
Yeah, he's just really impressed me. Like, you know, watching the Lightning against those Rangers, I'm like, this guy, unbelievable.
He's so good. There's a reason why he was up for the Calder Trophy last year. There's a reason why he was up for that award. So he has really, really impressed me in this postseason, and they just are able to score. They're a high-scoring team, and their defense, this is something that people don't talk about enough. Victor Hedman has really come into his own as an NHL defenseman. As you know, defensemen are a little bit slower than forwards to develop their game into the NHL. But when he first came into the league, you know, he was giving away pucks and taking stupid penalties, and he was really not playing well. And it took a few years to get used to John Cooper's system, and he has been phenomenal for them. A great two-way guy who can hit, can score goals as well. And then you got a few other guys like Braden Coburn, Matt Carl on that team, and then Anton Strawman, who I think is very underrated as well. So this is a team that hasn't been there before. They're very, I'd still say, underrated. A lot of people didn't think Tampa Bay would have the team that could get to this Cup final because other than Stamkos, they don't really have any game breakers on their team. So
I do remember in the preview pod, though, you were already pretty high on Tampa. So I got to give you credit for kind of seeing this team coming.
Yeah, I heading into the preview podcast, I thought that this was going to be the breakout postseason for them. I thought Stamkos would, especially in the earlier rounds, have a little bit more larger of a role, and I didn't think it was going to be such a balanced effort throughout all their lines for Tampa Bay. But Johnson stepped up, Andre Palat stepped up, Kucherov stepped up. A lot of these guys have that experience, and a lot of these guys are really, I guess, wanting to win the Stanley Cup, obviously. But a guy like Brendan Morrow, who is, people forgot that he was playing for Tampa Bay because he was
kind of did for a second there too.
Playing for Dallas for so long.
Yeah.
And Brendan Morrow, his rookie season was the year after Dallas won the Stanley Cup. So he has never had the chance to really make his mark in the Stanley Cup Finals. So he's going to be hungry for this championship. And I think because they've upset 3 original 6 teams in a row, can make it 4 in the series, I think their really mentality is, why not us?
No, exactly.
Why can't we win? Yeah. So.
And isn't there some stat of whenever Stamkos scores, they win?
Basically, yeah. Steven Stamkos, the first round, he was silent. He was nowhere to be found. Detroit was going to win that series. And Bishop played very well, and some of the role depth guys stepped up to advance them to the next round. Series versus Montreal, Rangers, forget about it. Stamkos just went into beast mode and went into what you expect Steven Stamkos to do in the series. So he has just been impressive so far, and it really is good to see him in the Stanley Cup Finals because he really is one of the most dynamic players in the NHL. You could say the same thing, let's say, if Ovechkin went to the Cup Finals. So we know at the end of this series, it's either going to be Taves or Stamkos lifting the cup over their heads. We just got
pretty sweet. And then we'll go to the negatives, which, aren't as fun, but, they got to be pointed out.
It's got to be talked about.
And let's start with Chicago, trying to get that dynasty. What's going to keep Chicago from getting the dynasty?
Two things, I think. I think at forward, they're fine. Defense, their defenses look shaky at a couple times. They've rolled 4 defensemen out pretty much throughout the whole playoffs. That's Seabrook, Keith, Oduya, and Hjalmarsson. That third pairing has barely played in the series. I think a lot thanks to Michael Rozabal going down with injury and missing the rest of the playoffs. Even though Rozabal is not one of the stars on this team, he is such a core depth guy in that third D-man pairing that they're really missing him. And so they're kind of rotating a couple players through. They're rotating guys like David Rundblad's played a little bit. Kimmo Timonen's played, but you can tell that he has really lost his step since coming back to the NHL from a blood clot. And it's that third pairing really frightens me if I'm the Blackhawks, because it's much like Calgary. Calgary rolled 3 defensemen throughout basically that entire playoffs, and eventually they get worn out, as you saw in the series against Anaheim. And so when you roll that few guys through this long of a stretch, and Chicago, they just got through a 7-game series and now got to play another tough series again. So that worries me. The other thing that worries me about Chicago is Corey Crawford. I know that he was in net the last time they won the Cup. And he's been in net the majority of the series. Scott Darling was in a little bit in the first round.
Yeah.
But Crawford is probably, I would say, the streakiest goaltender in the NHL. At times, he will stop. He would stop, 50 or 60 shots in that triple overtime that they did a little bit earlier against the Ducks, I guess one of them. But he was able to stop 50, 60 shots. And then the next game, Chicago's got a 3-goal lead, and he lets in 3 goals in the span of 37 seconds. Yeah. So he's either on his game or he's off, and you could score at will on him.
So in the Nashville series, too, he was a little off in the Nashville series. And times Nashville looked like the better team, and I think that was because of Crawford. And like you said, they had to bring Darling in even.
Yeah, and Crawford, it all depends on what he does that night. I think that really determines if Chicago is going to win the series, is if Corey Crawford plays like he did in the last Stanley Cup final against Boston, I think they're fine, and they have a very good shot at winning the Stanley Cup. But if he's off his game, and with the offensive firepower coming the other way from Tampa, Chicago could very much be in trouble.
Let's go talk about the negatives on the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah, Tampa Bay, I think, even though I brought it up as a positive, they're inexperienced. Chicago's been here before, and they know what it takes, and Tampa Bay doesn't. It could be a good thing. It could be a very bad thing. A lot of the players could really fold under the pressure of playing in the Stanley Cup final, something that they've dreamed about since they were kids. That pressure could get to them, and that concerns me a little bit for Tampa Bay. It also concerns me a little bit for Tampa is just their star players showing up. If Stamkos has another quiet round like he did in round 1 against Detroit, I don't think he will because he's been on a roll recently. But if he's quiet, if Johnson's quiet, if they're relying on their real depth guys to step up like Morrow and a few of those guys, JT Brown and a few of those other guys, then Tampa could really lose that goal scoring touch, which has been their bread and butter all postseason long.
And then just overall thoughts on this whole Stanley Cup matchup.
I love it. I personally think that it's 2 very contrasting styles playing in the Cup Finals. I hate when it's 2 teams that are so similar that you know what you're expecting in a game. I don't really know what to expect in this Cup Finals because Tampa has the potential to spoil the party for Chicago, but Chicago also could just go on a roll and win in 4 games. So I'm very much looking forward to this. Both forward groups are extremely fast. It's going to be fast, competitive hockey. If both goaltenders are on, I'm expecting some overtime in this series. And I think this is going to be a very high-scoring series, which I think is going to be extremely fun for fans.
I would agree with you. I got Chicago in 7. I think I would have it a little earlier. Chicago not having home ice. I think they benefit definitely from having home ice, like any team would. But just something about that Chicago crowd. No offense to the Tampa crowd. Obviously, the Chicago crowd, I find, is a lot better home ice advantage for them. But they did it against Anaheim with no home ice, and I think they can do a similar thing against Tampa with no home ice.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to be a really cool series. It's actually going to kind of live up to the Memorial Cup, which we just saw a couple days ago, which was a fantastic tournament. But this is going to be a very, very fun series to watch from a hockey fan perspective. I'm gonna stick with my pick with Tampa. I think I still have to.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna say Tampa in 7. I think this is gonna go the distance.
Yeah.
This is very likely a series that's you're gonna see a lot of nights. 4-3 scores, 5-3 scores, 6-goal scores. It's going to be a really, really fun series. Not a whole lot of defensive hockey, I think, is coming out of this. And the players are going to be flying, and I'm excited.
I really like this type of the season now because you never when you're a basketball fan and you're a hockey fan, you got to have to kind of have them overlap each other. And now you get every other night, you get one of the two. And, speaking of which, this is mainly a hockey pod, but quickly get your thoughts on who's going to win the NBA Finals.
NBA Finals, I honestly think that it's the Warriors here. I really do. I think Steph Curry is just an absolute talent to watch and a joy to watch. And I think that he is having just one of those seasons where he just can't be stopped.
Yeah.
And he's going up against LeBron, and that's going to be a fun matchup to watch there on the courts. And even though the Cavs have brought in all this talent last offseason, been really kind of bringing them together as a team, they've had some injury problems.
Yeah.
And that's when you're deep into the playoffs, that could hurt you. And so Golden State, Klay Thompson coming back, I think is absolutely huge for them.
It's a big deal.
And so I think just because Golden State's a little bit more rested than Cleveland is, I think that could really make the difference in the series.
I really think, too. It's actually surprising since we've done back and forth all these previews today. A lot of people, more people than I thought, have picked the Cavaliers. And I think people are just kind of riding with LeBron. They go with that star athlete. And I really like in both these series that you really have two stars in each one that can really drive people to that. Like 4 overall household names with LeBron James against Steph Curry and Steven Stamkos versus Jonathan Taves. Especially on the hockey side, I like that they have 2 names that most people on hockey know. And I think that really helps.
I do think in this NBA Finals, though, I think Curry and LeBron are both going to step up. I think they're going to play as they usually do and be stars. What is going to determine this series is going to be the depth players and who is the least injured, I think. Because I think these stars cancel each other out because I think they are the 2 best players in the NBA right now.
That's definitely debatable, but yes.
I think they'll cancel each other out, and it all depends on the role players. Those guys are going to be coming off the bench. I think if somebody comes off the bench and has a really, really solid game and puts their team into the lead in the series, I think that could really make a huge difference.
That's ultimately why I picked the Warriors, just because at the end of the day, much like when we've seen the Cavs against the Spurs, the Heat against the Spurs, LeBron against the Spurs, it ultimately comes down to a team. It takes a team to win a game, and I think there's 2 X factors on each side. I think the X factor for the Cavs is Canadian Tristan Thompson. He's played excellent. And I think the X factor for the Warriors is Harrison Barnes.
Yeah.
He's really been stepping up, and he's arguably been the second best player for the Warriors. And if he can continue his scoring, I think it'll be a nice little flow to the championship for the Warriors. But I hope that it's a competitive series because these NBA playoffs have been terrible.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than a 4-game sweep.
No.
In any sport. So
we should still be watching basketball right now. It's Jared pointed out, I put this tweet up, I'm like, who would have thought we'd see the NBA Finals set before the NHL Finals?
Yeah.
And NHL started, I think, a week and a half before the
about
NBA.
That. Yeah, about a week and a half.
And we just had so many sweeps and so many blowouts, and it was really hard to stomach. And meanwhile, like you said at the beginning, Scott, these NHL playoffs, to bring it back full circle to, because this is a Shorthanded podcast, these NHL playoffs have been phenomenal. For us as Calgary fans, it was an absolute treat. But outside of that, it was funny because I had a dinner party here with some family the other night, and a lot of people had said, oh, I didn't watch the second round because when the Flames are out, it really broke my heart to watch hockey. But watching these conference finals, I realized why I love hockey.
Exactly. And that's, at the end of the day, it's fun to cheer for whatever team you're rooting for if they end up making the playoffs. But at the end of the day, hockey fans just want to see good hockey. And like I said at the beginning of the podcast, when you get to the conference finals and the Stanley Cup finals, you're looking at the best teams in the NHL, not just from a standpoint of they've gotten to that point, but to get to that point, you have to weed out all the teams that really, I wouldn't say didn't deserve to get to that point, but are really, not equipped to make it to the Stanley Cup finals. So these are 2 teams that a lot of people picked at the beginning of the year to make it to this point. Not because that they thought it was going to be a fluke breakout year, but because these are 2 very evenly position teams. So it's going to be a very, very fun series. And I think it has the potential to be one of the better Stanley Cup finals that we've seen in the past few years.
I would absolutely agree with you. And who's your Conn Smythe?
Conn Smythe, I would give it right now. It depends on who wins the series, but I think it's either between Jonathan Toews and Tyler Johnson.
Yeah, it's going to go the exact same way. It's going to go the exact same way. Well, Scott, it's always a pleasure. Unless anything drastic comes, we'll have you. But if not, the next time we will be talking to you will be your favorite time of the year, other side of the finals, will be NHL draft time, and we have a doozy of a draft this year.
It's going to be an absolute fun one to predict because it is one of the best draft classes that we've seen in a long time, and there's definitely going to be some movement, some interesting picks. Beyond the top 2 picks, I honestly have no idea where the rest of the picks are going to lie. So it's going to be a fun one to preview, but it's going to be a fun couple of weeks of hockey first.
I should probably save this for the draft, but there's been a lot of Jake Eichel talk as of the last few weeks over McDavid a little bit. Just a little bit of whispers of that, maybe Eichel could be a little bit of a better pro. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, because there's been a few whispers and a little bit of chatter on Sportsnet and TSN about it lately.
It's definitely a little bit of talk that Eichel could get to that point, and who knows? Eichel might turn out to be a better player than McDavid. But in this draft, the Edmonton Oilers got the first overall pick, and as soon as that, they're not going to choose. You would have to pay them millions and millions of dollars if they were going to choose anyone other than McDavid. I even know at that point if they would choose anyone over McDavid. It was definitely a huge blessing for the Edmonton franchise. And even talking to McDavid on TV, I've seen on Sportsnet and TSN, stuff like that, they've asked him, how are you going to enjoy playing in Edmonton? And like it's such a foregone conclusion. So McDavid going to Edmonton, Eichel going to Buffalo. That's as far as I can preview right now for the draft preview. But
we'll let you enjoy the finals, Scott.
Perfect.
And thank you for coming on. Make sure you check out Scott and everything else. Make sure you check him out on Twitter during the playoffs.
Yes.
How can they find you?
They can find me on Twitter, Scotty Roblin, SCOTTYROBLIN. Going to be tweeting a bunch about the playoffs, Stanley Cup finals, and giddy up. It's a fun time.
It absolutely is. Scott, thank you for coming on. Everyone else, cheers, and enjoy the day, people.